Dear Rise listeners, welcome back to Rise with Sinalo Matubatuba. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, share with your friends, and do the most. Please hit the notification bell. Also, comment on our videos. The only way in which we are going to continue with the conversation is if you support the content that we make, and we'll reach bigger crowds through you and through your phone or wherever you might be listening the podcast from. But without wasting any time, welcome once again to Rise. And today we're going to talk about something that is more personal, and that is the boy who thought the world was too big. And that is me. I want to start off by saying that we all have our different journeys, and our journeys are marked and shaped by different experiences. And in my experience, I grew up in a home where I was raised by, two parents, but that was short-lived because my parents got divorced, and my life changed forever. And I'm not saying that because I'm victimizing myself or I'm sad or what. I think it's the best thing that has ever happened in my life. But I want to say that it did change how I saw life and the things that I went for, to realize that I have to stand and be independent. So I would like you to pause at this point, and if you can, close your eyes. And please don't close your eyes if you're driving and you're listening to this episode. But have you ever felt like the world was too big for you? That your dreams were too distant, your voice too small, and your steps too slow? Have you ever felt as though you are not enough? So in my story, I grew up in Matatiele, and I remember my first day of grade one. I was accompanied by my late cousin, Sinalo Matubatuba, may his soul rest in peace. And I went into class. I remember at the time, my teacher was a lady called Auntie Yechna, Miss Jube, and she was my grade one teacher. And I sat in class, and the lesson started, but I was so agitated. I wouldn't sit still. I wouldn't be able to focus in class. I would daydream, think about what I was doing over the weekend, and things like that. So I never got tasks done. And this went on, in the year, and ultimately my parents were then called in to say, look, this boy is not doing anything. And my parents then wanted to seek professional help because the teachers were of the view that I belonged to a special school, which my mother, was really against, and said there's nothing wrong with my son, or there's nothing that actually requires him to go to special school. So I remember my parents took me to a specialist in Durban, and they did like scans. My head, I remember I had to shave my head off clean, and I had certain like wires stuck on my head, and there was this monitor in which they were like monitoring my brain activity, and I was required to sit still, and my mother was seated there, and apparently this monitor thing, every time I moved or I coughed, this thing would start over. And at the end, I was then diagnosed with what they call attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is called ADHD. And that changed how I viewed myself, because I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I was crazy. Why am I being diagnosed with this, and why do I have to take a pill every morning? So I then had to take pills every morning, and it really knocked my self-esteem, because at the end of that year, I then had to repeat grade one. Now you can imagine, I'm this young guy, and the first day of school in the repeating year, the following year when I was repeating, we were lined up. And as we were lined up, I had to go stand with people that I was not like studying with, because all my friends, all my classmates from the previous year had progressed to grade 2. And I was laughed at because people were like, "Aibo, Sinalo, Jonile," And I think mentally I had prepared myself for that. I knew that I was gonna be laughed at. I knew that I was gonna be bullied. But I stood my ground, went to class. It was different now because okay, at least I could sit still, and then that's when I started being able to engage in class and being able to get into that environment. And it was very hard. It was very hard because I attributed everything to my self-worth and what I'm really capable of. Why do I need pills to function when other kids are just doing it by themselves? And it was really hard for me to integrate into my community and even make friends. And I remember I then left the primary school that I was at the end of the year, and then I moved to another school, which is the school I ultimately matriculated in. And I also had a problem with making friends. And one of my friends, I think my first friend there was Aaron Lombard, and I believe he's still around. And before that, I literally, at break time, I would take my lunch tin and I would go to the gate. At the gate, there was the security guard, and there I would just chill and talk to this guy. And this guy happened to be someone who was familiar with my family. But, we had the best conversations ever, and I considered the security guard at the gate my friend because I couldn't make friends who were of my age. But we had so many conversations, and the school teachers saw this and they told my mom that your son goes to the gate and he chills with the security guard, so what's going on? My mom said, so why don't you find him a friend? And that's how Aaron became my friend. But I'm sharing this with you so that even in growing up, there might be something that you are very embarrassed about. There might be something in your background that you don't have pride sharing, that you do not want people to know about you, or that you're very shy in people knowing about you. But I want to tell you that in as much as you may feel as though that, actually stings your self-worth, or you feel very small when that is shared, it does not define you. You are not defined by your past. Instead, whatever you may have went through, it is your superpower. So in everything that always draw strength from that. I always draw strength from my lows. I always draw strength from things that people can think they can break me by raising them, such as what I've just shared with you. So I wanted to take you back to my story, thinking that it might, encourage you in your own. And in me going through all of this, it knocked my confidence. It knocked what I thought I was capable of. It knocked what I thought I was capable of achieving. But through having a great support system, being my parents, I was able to, withstand all the frustration and all those points of feeling inadequate in my life. And I was able to progress, And I think it's also by the grace of God that I was able to move on and, grow stronger from that. I'm so far from where I'd want to be in life, but I can definitely say that I have grown from that period of my life. So I think I want us to explore things like being hard on yourself, things like having self-doubt, and learning to show yourself kindness. We live in a world where everything is portrayed as perfect. In the world of digital media, social media, where, we post ourselves, and there's certain filters that are put like in this imperfect world, but we try and make it perfect. So growing up, I had big dreams. I remember my parents bought me, to be specific, my mother bought me a doctor's kit which had a stethoscope, play injection, pills and stuff. Because I thought I was going to be a doctor at a point. And growing up, I then learned that, okay, actually, I'm not interested in that. And I had a very strong love for reading. And I think my mom always makes the joke that I used to, act like I'm reading a newspaper. But I think looking back, I think I used to ask for money to go buy the Sunday Times around 2009, 2010. I was 9 years old, 10 years old. I used to ask for the Sunday Times. And I had a love for current affairs. I wanted to know what was going on. I would watch the news. I came from a very, I'd say, opinionated household. My parents were not involved in politics, but my grandfather was involved in politics. I loved history, and I was fortunate enough to be around people that loved history, such as my late uncle, who I always share about, who inspired me to pursue law, who was a lawyer himself. I always share about my grandfather, who was a politician, someone who was involved in the struggle against apartheid. And those people shaped my interests and me eventually venturing into law. So I felt small, but when I'd pick up a book, or when I'd be told, I did poetry, when I'd be told, okay, please recite this, that would give me some power. I felt like my power was in engaging with people and speaking to people. And I was very hesitant and very, against the idea of pursuing law, because I thought, like, I'm not reinventing the wheel. Like, how many lawyers must there be in my family? But I chose to embrace it, And I remember I used to have doubts about how much lawyers earn. And my mother always said to me, passion is everything. I know there might be a debate about this, but this is something I really resonate with. If you're passionate about something, you'll never work a day in your life. I'm sure you've heard that somewhere. And if you'll never work in a day in your life, and if you're passionate about something, then you're going to be good at it. If you're good at something, then the market will want you. If the market wants you, then the market will be willing to pay whatever that you are charging for that. So I remember, I'm saying this because at the time we had to choose what we're doing in university and everything. We would go on Google, search highest paying careers in South Africa, things like that. So I'm trying to say, sometimes you might have an interest in something, and it might not be the most famous thing or the trending thing, but that doesn't make it irrelevant. Yes, we have to be realistic. What is realistic economically? What is in demand in terms of the country? What do we need as a country? But don't shy away from your interests. Don't shy away from things that you believe are your strong power. And for me, because I had family members who were lawyers, I felt like, why can't I then do something else without really tapping into myself and seeing what I'm really passionate about? And there was no doubt that I was, interested in law. And I remember one of my mentors at the time gave me a book called The Foundation of Law. And that book, I still have that copy. I read that book before I even applied for law. And that book was basically talking about the history of law. I remember from, Roman law, Justinian Code, the 12 tables. If you're a law student and you did introduction to law, you have an idea of what I'm talking about. So I did introduction to law before I even registered for a course. And I'm saying that because it kind of showed me something that I still apply today, is that if you want to go for something, you need to be intentional about it even before, you know. I used to be laughed at for doing that at times because people were like, you're not a law student, bro. But I became a law student and I became a law graduate. I'll be a lawyer soon, by the grace of God. And, you know, I did have doubt or feelings of doubt and feeling left behind. And I say this, law doesn't require maths. So I had the hardest time with maths. Like maths used to frustrate me because I always felt like people would give in 100% and I'd have to give in 300%. And choosing subjects in grade 9, I remember I chose my subjects. I chose physics, I chose maths, I chose life science, I chose accounting. And so I started in grade 10. I started with those subjects. I went to the physics class. I remember the physics class was the first lesson of the day, and Mr. Philip was explaining the periodic table, the elements of the periodic table. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to do this. So I stood up, I said, sir, sorry, I'm going to history. So I then joined history. So if you were listening earlier on, I said history was one of my loves because the only thing I'd ever read is history books. But when I chose the subjects, I was on that thing that opening career subject is physics, you know. And I'm grateful that my parents were not those parents that would force me to do something even though I didn't want it. They took to mind that if he's forced to do this, then he will not succeed in it. And I'll be always grateful to my parents for not forcing me to do physics and then ending up in something that I really didn't like. So I then went to history. But for maths, I stayed on, and I always talk about my high school maths teacher, which was Mr. Thomas, and may his soul rest in peace. Mr. Thomas didn't just teach me maths, he taught me life, because he was an elderly guy who was very, very, very smart. And I had to, because I feared disappointing him and stuff. I think at the end of the year in maths, I got a 52%. And then I decided that, look, I've had a very bad year. This thing is frustrating me. I already know I want to study law. I've looked at the university prospectus. I don't need maths. So I'm going to maths literacy. And I'm sure you know of the feud between maths and maths literacy and people doing that. But I wasn't concerned about that. But my concern was I want to finish matric and I'm going to move. So the lesson in that is do what you want to do. Don't do what your friend or your, I don't know, whoever you might be aligned with wants to do. So I then left and I went to maths literacy. And in that, it was hard because, you know, I was told that you're making a very big mistake. And through doing that, I then learned that when you've made a decision, you need to stand by a decision. So it was a period of uncertainty, a period of doubt, a period of fear. But through all of that, because I was resolute in what I wanted, because I had kept my eyes on the prize, I was very, looking back, I'm grateful for that. And I've learned that in spite of everything, if you keep your eyes on the prize, if you have a vision for yourself, and if you want to pursue that, then you can go for it. Not everyone is going to approve or applaud what you're doing. And the other maths teacher then called me the other time to address the maths students, because he said he was of the philosophy that, look, not everyone is supposed to do maths, and that is fine. And so I had to go speak to the students. So from being enemy number one to being hero, I felt like a Nelson Mandela. But yeah, I really feel like the turning point was at that point where my mindset shifted, where I felt like, okay, I can do this. I can still conquer my dreams, and I think I found my power through those lessons in my high school career, and that set me up for going into university. And I realized that the world isn't too big for me. What happened in my life doesn't shape me. What happened is just part of my journey, but it is not the end of my journey. And I encourage you, we come from different backgrounds and we've experienced a lot of things, sometimes painful things, sometimes very embarrassing things, sometimes things that want you to get into a hole and cover it. But even if that is the case, that is not the end, and that does not define you. Do not be scared to stand, to stand tall amongst people, because you're like, hey, these people had this background and I didn't have this background. So always be proud of where you come from. Sometimes it's not nice, and sometimes one can say, oh, you're glorifying struggle. We're not glorifying struggle. It is through our past, it is through what we went through that we find our power, because then we develop the empathy and the understanding. Sometimes when we get to a point where when we are leaders, we find the very same child who has went through what we went through. And that is the point, or that's the message that I'm trying to convey with the podcast. To say that I am a black child that comes from humble beginnings, and there are many out there who have had my own experience, and even worse sometimes, but they should also know that it is possible. Sinalo did it, so I can also do it. That is the whole point that we were trying to move. So moving on, I think I spoke about kindness, being kind to yourself. I want to share a reflection on why being hard on yourself doesn't work. So self-criticism doesn't fuel growth, it drains it. And I think the three lessons that we can draw from this is that self-criticism is sabotage, one. Two, kindness fuels resilience. And three, action makes the big world feel smaller. When you are kind to yourself, even if you mess up, you'll be like, okay, I tried. And that is the key to everything. You need to try. You need to start. You need to, go on with it. And there's nothing wrong with being aware and reflecting on what you have done, but you mustn't criticize yourself to the point where you're so hard on yourself, you don't want to do anything. It drains you out. You don't want to speak to people. You don't want to engage or even do or try what you had set out for yourself again. And that is not important. Like, that is not great for you. And you need to move from a point of self-criticism to self-compassion. Be compassionate about yourself. And I'm not saying be obsessed about yourself. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying be obsessed with yourself and not listen to people or what. But you need to understand that we will make mistakes and we will mess up, like a lot. Like you will mess up, guys, but that is not the be all end all. the strength or your true strength lies in you continuing and striving and soldiering on, and I don't like sometimes the description I get that I'm being motivational or I'm a motivational speaker. If I'm a motivational speaker, then so be it. But all I'm trying to do is for us to have these frank conversations, because it is through conversation and relativity that we can, help each other grow. And I think we need to shift away from that thing of looking for validation from other people. Like, if you want to do this thing, just do it. Reframe yourself from saying that you are not enough or you are not there yet. Say, I'm still becoming. You are always constantly evolving, and you always constantly evolve to be a better version of yourself. You don't have to get it right now. You might not have that job. You might not have secured that job for yourself. You might not have got the business breakthrough that you want. You might have not got into that university that you want. But it doesn't end there. You are still becoming. And through our negative experiences, let's not let that define us to a point where that definition or us defining ourselves cripples us from moving on. In whatever hiccup that you might have had along the way, use it as fuel to continue. Do not be at a point that, oh, okay, so I wasn't accepted into this university. Oh, that means I'm not smart. Okay, so I've stopped applying. Or if you haven't got the job and you get the regret letter, and I'm sorry to inform you, do not stop now applying. There was a point where I used to get regret letters when I was applying for articles. And a firm I applied at the time, my first ever interview, I was very excited. I was in my second year, and this guy said to me, it was my first interview. So we spoke about my extracurricular activities, me involved in sport, what sport I played at the time, my transcript. Now remember, at that point, only results I had were my first year results. And this recruiter says to me, I see you work hard, I see your results. I don't think you're a culture fit for our firm. And that broke me. I think I didn't apply for 6 months. Like, I was so bitter about that, right? Because it so happened that after that guy said that, I then got back to back, we regret to inform you letters. And that really, it took so much for me to shift out of that. And I'll tell you where it changed. So after this whole, I'll say, negative experience, I mean, yes, maybe they were right. I was not a culture fit for the firm. I'll accept that. I then moved to, on this particular day, I went to a career fair. And for some reason, the recruiter at that fair was not the recruiter that had interviewed me, but was from the same firm. So as people were asking questions, I was so unbothered. I just wanted the pens and the caps, to be honest. And this lady says to me, don't you want to work for us? And I said, no. And she was interested to know why. And I said, look, I just had a few months ago, I had an interview with your firm, and what that guy said to me in the interview really broke my spirit. And this lady said, you may not be for us, but you may be for someone else. So she then went on to say, a closed door is not the end, but you can be redirected to an open door. And then I was like, okay, because I came off too strong. I think I was a bit bitter, and I was, spicy in my response to her. So I said, okay, so since I did not get in, what do you advise I do? You know. So I started responding to all those we regret to inform you later. Thank you for considering me and for the interview. What can I do best to, you know? I changed my attitude. And me changing my attitude changed my life because I then accepted that you will be rejected. You will not be accepted everywhere, and that is totally fine. But that doesn't define you. You will be directed or redirected to somewhere else. And that's what I did. So I think I want to give, so there's this new thing I want to start, which is to have practical takeaways, right? And the first one is that start training yourself that you are move away from saying to yourself, you are not enough. Move to a place where you're going to say, you are becoming, right? That's the first one. And then the second one is that set a long-term vision for yourself. And in setting that long-term vision for yourself, don't let thoughts of that you are too ambitious and stuff like that. I will cover an episode about ambition, which I find quite interesting. But set a long-term goal for yourself and break that dream for yourself. Break it into actionable steps. I have a mentor that says to me, have a long-term goal for yourself and then look at how you are going to realize it now. So in you having, for instance, let's say I say I want to be, I'm making an example now. Let's say I want to become a president of South Africa. So what can I do today? Okay, do I start a political party? Okay, no, I don't know. Or I maybe I start a political party, or maybe I join a political party and I try to go up the ranks so that I get there. So you start small and in sight of the big dream you have and in working towards that big dream you have. So that's the second thing. And the third thing I would say is that celebrate the small wins. Celebrate the small wins. I always make an example of this at work. So at work, because I'm a candidate attorney, usually you'd prepare the first draft of something that is going to be sent to client, right? And usually because you're a candidate attorney, 95% of that draft is going to be changed. And I would read a draft that ultimately is sent out, right? And then you find a one line or one sentence that was actually from what you had written, and I'd be so happy by just that one sentence. From a 3-page to that one sentence of something that I wrote, right? And I'd celebrate that because I'd consider that as a small win, a compliment that was said, good job, whatever. Like, what you celebrate doesn't have to be of, great magnitude. It doesn't have to be this groundbreaking thing, And I started adopting a culture where I celebrate my small wins to a point where I'm like, okay, tonight I'm not cooking. I'm gonna order something, So you do that. You that's how you get onto a journey of realizing and not being too hard on yourself. Celebrate your small wins. That builds you, and that's what I've done. And I think the last thing, and I think the most important thing, is that talk to yourself like you would a friend. Talk to yourself like how you'd speak to a friend that is going through a hard time. Speak to yourself like how you'd speak to a girl that you want to be